Hello, everyone. Give me 1 second while I just get set up here, and then we will get started. Awesome. All right, so in past events that I've done, I have noticed that I have not been able to share my screen with the PowerPoint that I would like to share it with. Can you guys hear me? Just want to make sure. Yes, awesome. Thank you. Okay, we will start here. All right. Okay, so thank you all for coming. I want to just make a quick note here. I'm not able to stay in this environment while I'm presenting. And so in order for you to either ask questions or if there's anything that you want to know about, then you just have to like, maybe I can come every once in a while and come check the chat, but it's unlikely that I'll be able to do that very well. But yeah, I'll just try and come back here and there. If you really want to get my attention, just unmute yourself and let me know, because I'm just not going to be able to see the chat all that often. So, but yeah, I'm excited to do this. My name is Jordan Marsh. Obviously, I have just recently gotten my MBA from Kellogg, and I'm finishing my last year of medical school, and I'm endeavoring to be kind of a healthcare-specific MBA admissions coach here on Leland. And so I thought that I would give you some of the best advice that I have for doing really well in your MBA interviews, especially if you either have a healthcare background or if you're looking to switch into healthcare. And I'll talk a little bit more about my background and why you should ever even want to listen to me in the first place. All right. So let's start. I'll just briefly start by giving you an introduction to who I am and what I'm interested in. So I am in my last year of med school, and my overarching desire or goal is to be what I would call like a longevity specialist. So there's a book called Outlive by Peter Attia that kind of rekindled my desire and my interest in medicine. And so I want to go ahead and do a family medicine residency, do a primary care residency, and then maybe do like a fellowship in sports medicine. Largely because I think there's an interesting field of longevity that's becoming more prevalent. And that is, all around the idea of aging well, aging in a way that we can preserve our quality of life. And so I'm really interested in that, and I really want to dive into that as I go forward in my future. That involves preventative health, being very mindful about the things that we do to prevent disease as opposed to just react to it when it comes. So that involves exercise, nutrition, and anything having to do with preventative health tech. That's something that I want to be involved in. Value-based care is a innovative payment structure in healthcare that I think has a lot of potential and is the future of medicine in America, at least for sure, maybe in other countries as well. And so I also find value-based care, of course, the idea is we pay for value as opposed to just paying for volume. So we're not just paying for the next procedure or paying for the next drug, we're paying for your health. And I think that that's kind of an interesting, there's a lot of nuances to that, and I want to be involved in that. I want to own my own practice in the future and correlate my screening data with health outcomes, and just kind of make all my patients my little test subjects. I hope that doesn't come across weird, but that's kind of what I'm thinking of doing. I just recently started something called Jordan Marsh Med, where I'm doing a bunch of article reviews on longevity. And that's kind of like my little passion project right now, something that I really enjoy doing. And it's all about, improving exercise metrics like VO2 max, your nutrition, I even go into like cold exposure, like cold plunges and stuff. It's still in its infancy, but I'm excited to keep it going. So that's where I hope to go in the future. Let me tell you about my background. So I finished a chemical engineering undergraduate degree at the University of Utah in 2018. From there, I spent 2 years as a patent examiner at the USPTO, and really enjoyed that. It was kind of a radical departure from what I was expecting with my first job out of college, but it was awesome and I loved it. After that, I started medical school at the Carle, Illinois College of Medicine in Urbana-Champaign, Illinois. This school is kind of their stated objective is to be an engineering-based medical school. So most of the medical students there have an engineering undergrad, kind of like I did, and that really resonated with me because they want to use that engineering background to kind of become what they call physician innovators. And so I've thought I kind of take that very seriously. That's something that I'm excited about, and I want to think about problems in medicine in a very from a multidisciplinary perspective. So I then took a year off between my third and fourth year of medical school to attend Kellogg, Northwestern Kellogg School of Management. And I did the 1 year program there and absolutely loved it. And that's what kind of brought me to Leland was, I actually am friends with the founder. I was roommates with the founder of Leland in college. And then one of the guys that did the same program with me at Kellogg is also one of the co-founders or first members of Leland, and so I really like it here. I love what they're building, and also want to contribute to it. So now, why should you care? Why do you care about listening to me? Because both at my medical school and at Kellogg, I was on the admissions committee. So on my medical school, that meant I was reviewing applications and kind of grading applications on certain criteria. But at Kellogg, that meant that I was the interviewer. I actually performed a bunch of interviews for students at Kellogg. So I feel like I have something to say about, who performed well and who didn't, and what you can do to really help yourself stand out. Okay. So I hope that from all that, you can see at least, some reason why you may want to listen to what I have to say, and hopefully it will be helpful for you. Okay. So let's dive into it. This is the 7 must-know strategies for healthcare professionals in MBA interviews. And I wanted to structure this like, here's the advice that I would give to somebody, that just general advice that I would give to somebody in an MBA interview. And then I will add a little tag to each one of these with what I would advise if you have a healthcare background and if you're trying to switch into healthcare. Okay. So let me start with a story because stories are important, and I want to show you why they're important and why you need to really think carefully about the type of stories that you're sharing. So in my third year of medical school, I was in my neurology rotation, and I was working with a particular neurologist for a whole week. And during this rotation, he wanted me to learn something very specific, which was he wanted me to learn all the different types of MRI sequences that they use to identify pathology in neuro patients. Okay. And there's a bunch of different types. There's T2 FLAIR, there's tensor imaging, there's T1 imaging. There's all these different types of MRIs, and they all give you different information about what's going on in the patient's brain. However, the thing that was interesting was this was not material that was required for me for my exams. Okay. So I kind of, went into it, and I could tell that the neurologist really wanted me to know it. And I also kind of was like, I know that this isn't necessarily something that I'm going to be tested on, and not something that, is going to be ultimately important for me to pass the test. Okay. And 3 days into the clerkship, I had spent some time with him. He had tried to start teaching us. I was actually with another med student the whole time, and she was also pretty confused by the whole thing, but, was also trying to play along as if she was really understanding it. But by the 4th day, it was time for him to test me, and in medical school, it's frequently called pimping. This is when the attending doctor kind of, tests you on your knowledge and sees if you're really paying attention. And so he tests me on the different MRI imaging platform that we were using, and I failed. I said I don't really know, and he like laid into me, like really laid into me, like almost yelling at me, saying I'm wasting his time. He doesn't have time for medical students like me. He felt like I should know this by now after having spent a couple days with him, and um, but was suffice it to say he was very sharp in his criticism of me, which was alarming. Obviously, it was something that was really hard for me to take. And naturally, my inclination was to get defensive and to say, well, you don't really know what you're talking about. This is not something that medical students are really expected to know. And yet here you are getting mad at me for something that you think I should know. And I had a lot of time to think on it. I actually had a lot of time between when this happened to when I was going to give my feedback for the rotation, and I kind of felt like, oh, I'm gonna just probably give him a bad score and tell him why he's not really important. But I was thinking on it, and as obviously as the shock kind of wore off, I was thinking about it, thinking about what he was telling me, and one thing that came to me was that it's not necessarily that I need to learn to be a physician so that I can pass a test. It's that I need to learn how to be a physician that can help patients, right? And that is something that really stuck with me. And I actually was grateful for the experience because for the first time, I could tell that somebody actually cared that I was learning something. Sometimes attendings just kind of go about their day and they're like, oh, another med student, let's just get rid of this. You kind of feel like they just wish you weren't there so that they could go faster. And at least I could tell that this guy was somewhat invested in actually having me learn something. And he was upset with me because I wasn't really living up to that standard that he had set. Okay. So, that's what I took away from it. That's the learning that I took away from it. And I felt like, I had an opportunity to give an idea to people of how I handle critical feedback. Okay. So that's the question that I want you to think about. Let's say that I'm in my interview and somebody asks me, how do you handle critical feedback? And if I were to respond with that story, what were the things, what did you learn about me from that story? You might learn, oh, he's able to recognize when he made a mistake. Like I made a mistake. It was clear that I did. And after some time, I was able to actually appreciate that, I had gotten the criticism that I did. I'm able to learn from harsh or critical feedback. So maybe it's not just about passing tests. When you're in med school, there's a lot of tests and you're always worried about it. And you're always thinking, it's always in the back of your mind that you got to be on top of that. But, I was able to see like, hey, I'm probably like kind of missing the forest through the trees here. Like I'm too worried about the test. And I'm not worried enough about what I need to learn to be a good physician. So, and then I'm able to maybe not retaliate, but consider my part in the problem. Like I had an opportunity to lay into him too. I could have in my review of the rotation kind of given him the business too, but I chose not to. And I actually was, I said that I was grateful for the time that I spent with him and felt like, he really actually did care about my learning. So maybe I was being a little bit of a doorknob, or doormat. Maybe there are certain circumstances where abuse, abuse is never okay, right? But there are certain circumstances where it's not necessarily abuse. Maybe it's just a little sharp and it's hard to hear, and it's hard for me to think, oh man, I really screwed up here. Okay, so I tell you that because those are the things that you might have been able to learn about from that story, and hopefully after the interview, or maybe after this hour is up, you may remember that story, right? Let's say though, however, instead of answering that question with a story, I answered like this. How do you handle critical feedback? Oh, I can recognize when I make mistakes. I can learn from harsh or critical feedback, and I can consider my part in the problem. I haven't given any evidence that that is true, right? If I just say that and that's how I respond to that question, I haven't given the interviewer any evidence that that is true. And I'm pretty forgettable, honestly, because clearly it's just there's no substance behind what I'm saying. I don't really know if that's the case, but with a story, you're kind of proving to the interviewer that you do handle critical feedback in certain ways, right? So, stories, stories, stories. Your interview is your opportunity to tell stories, and you really need to land that well. I wanted to make a very quick point here too. There's a difference between writing and interviewing, right? Writing, you have to be succinct. You have to not repeat yourself. You have to make sure that what you're saying is you have to make sure that you're actually staying within a certain character limit or whatever it is. But interviewing is not necessarily that at all, right? Because interviewing is your opportunity to really express yourself in a more humane or human way, right? And so, you know, I'm in the midst of applying for residencies right now, and I had to do a lot of writing over the last 3 weeks. And writing just is tough, and I kind of hate it, and it's hard, right? Because I have to break everything down to a very small character limit and keep it short and succinct. With interviewing, you have your opportunity to express yourself in a way that you can. So it's harder to tell stories when you're writing, but it's easier to tell stories when you're interviewing. So you really need to think carefully about what stories you're telling. So I thought that I would include this. This is the basic structure of a good story. In my story, the character was me. The context was my neurology rotation with a certain neurology doctor or physician. The conflict was I wasn't really paying attention to what he was teaching me, and he was upset about it, right? The climax was he's screaming at me in front of another medical student and telling me that I'm basically wasting his time. And my closure was, oh, I actually did learn a lot from that. And I learned that it's not necessarily just about the test, it's also about the patients, right? So I think that you should keep this little matrix or this little story design framework in your mind as you design the stories that you want to tell about yourself. Okay. And then, I can include this here. Maybe you could take a screenshot or just a picture if you'd like. But this is just more, you know, a little bit more stuff that you can tell about that story design. Okay. So this is what is called the story matrix. And this is something that's taught at Kellogg. I can't claim this myself, but this story matrix is an opportunity for you to think carefully about the type of stories in your life that you want to tell based off of different use cases. Okay. So this might be a little small, but here you can see in rows, it's use case 1, use case 2, use case 3. But use case 1 underneath it says leadership. Use case 2, it says sales or qualifying sales or whatever. Use case 3, you keep on going. And for each of the different story types, you can tell a success. So this here, it would be your successful stories in leadership. Here would be your failure stories in leadership, your fun stories, your legend stories, whatever it is. But it gives you an opportunity to think, what were the stories in my life that I was successful as a leader? What were the stories in my life where I kind of failed as a leader? And you can have these stories in your mind, and they can remind you quickly what it is that you're actually. It can remind you quickly of the stories that define who you are. And so, I think that here, what you do in this particular spreadsheet, and if you're interested, I'd be happy to share this with you if you just message me afterwards. But what you do is you click on this link, and it goes to another tab in your spreadsheet where it describes in depth kind of the story and what happened. And then you can quickly reference it whenever you need it or right before your interview so that you're really ready for it. And you should be ready with a lot of stories for each of these interviews. You really should think carefully about all the different things in your life that you can remember that can help you stand out in an interview. So that when they say, how do you handle critical feedback? Or they say something like, tell me a time where, tell me a time where you failed and how did you respond to that? Sometimes they're not going to say, tell me a time. They're going to say, how do you handle your stress or something like that? It's really easy to just be like, oh, I go and meditate, or, oh, I go and, do some run on the gym or punch a punching bag or punch a teddy bear or something, but I think, you're really going to be best served when you are able to come up with a story, and especially when you can come up with a story without being prompted to. And that's something that the story matrix tells you to do. So the first strategy is create a story matrix. All right. Now, I told you that I'm going to tell you something about it being for healthcare professionals. Let me tell you about stories for healthcare professionals. What feels ordinary to you can sound heroic to MBA admissions committees. Okay. So let me give you a story in line with telling good stories. I applied to only 2 business schools. I applied to Harvard and I applied to Kellogg, and I got interviews at both. And during my Harvard MBA interview, it came up that I was in my surgery rotation at the time as a medical student, and she asked, "Oh, tell me about that. Tell me how that's going." And I told her, "Oh, my medical school is actually an engineering-based medical school where we try and innovate and come up with new ideas. And the new idea that I have for my surgery rotation is to, something that happens frequently during cholecystectomies or gallbladder removals is that the stones inside the gallbladder that we're trying to remove actually spill into the abdomen. And that can be a problem because if those stones aren't removed, that can induce, infection, that can increase complication rates. Oftentimes that stone can stay in the abdomen for a long period of time and then cause problems later on. So there's a lot of issues with spilled gallstones in the abdomen. And an idea that I came up with was something I called gall glow. And gall glow was basically just a dye that you would inject into the gallbladder before you attempted to take out the gallbladder, before you attempted the cholecystectomy. And what it would do is it would fluoresce the gallstones so that in the event that the gallstones did spill into the abdomen, hopefully you would be able to see them easier and be able to pluck them out, right? That was my idea. And I cannot tell you the look that Harvard person had on their face was just, the admissions interviewer on their face was like, holy cow, that's like that's amazing. That's incredible. That's something that's really cool. And it led to me talking about how I sit through many of these surgeries and I actually hold the camera, and I hold the camera for the surgeon so that the surgeon can do his or her work. And, it's funny because as a med students know that in the OR, oftentimes you are just a scrub. Oftentimes you are ignored. Oftentimes it's, people are annoyed that you're there. But to this admissions interviewer, it was like, wow, you get to hold the camera during surgeries to like take out gallbladders, and you've come up with this cool solution to, remove gallbladder stones from the abdomen. It was really like, I could just tell that, this person might not have had a healthcare background, and they were listening to me tell them about this healthcare thing. And they were like, whoa, So if you have a healthcare background and there are certain things that you do in your work, maybe you're a med student, or maybe you're at a pharmaceutical company or a medical device company or whatever it is, what feels ordinary and common and maybe not that important to you can sound heroic to MBA admissions committees. And your opportunity to tell that to them is something that really can resonate. Okay. So make sure to tell your stories and not sell yourself short. Okay. Because the stories that you tell can really come across as amazing. All right. And so here, I just wanted to say, like, with this 5 C's of story design, you can really build, a fascinating context, a really interesting climax, and some closure that can be quite dramatic and can lead to great stories that help you stand out to the admissions committee and that are rememberable for them later. All right. Okay. So here is your second strategy. Know your application. In the same MBA admissions interview at Harvard, I was asked about something called small talk. All right. And I probably put in maybe a paragraph about small talk in my application. And it's still something that I remembered. It's still something that I knew was in the application. But to be totally honest with you, I actually had forgotten some key details. And part of me thinks that might have been something that had maybe not, represented me well in the interview. And so for small talk, let me tell you briefly what it was. Okay, so there's research that shows that kids that come from higher socioeconomic backgrounds, they oftentimes, by the time they're age 3, they hear 30 million more words from their caregivers than those that come from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. And those words are exactly what help the brain to develop in really powerful and meaningful ways, because the brain from 0 to 3 is in like a highly neuroplastic state. And so that's a time when if you can really speak to your infant a lot in those first 3 years, you can really set them up for success. And our idea was a phone application, or like a device that would sit on the baby's clothing that would count the amount of words that was spoken to the child. Okay. And they thought that was just fascinating. And it is fascinating. I honestly think it's a cool idea. I did it in college. We applied, we competed in certain medical device competitions with it, and I had a really good time with it. Ultimately, it didn't work out, and all the team kind of went their separate ways after graduation, but it was an experience that I really felt like I should include in my application, because I felt like it showed my desire to solve important problems and to come up with new ideas and solutions. And this was what the interviewer was first interested in. A very small portion of my application, something that was like not even really the major highlight. That was what they wanted to know about first. Okay. So you really need to know your application. And I know that that's kind of silly to say, but Harvard, you had to turn in your application September 7th. And I think my interview was like October 23rd, something like that. And so, over that period of time, there's certain things that you might forget about. And there's certain things that you might not be as well versed on by the time the interview date comes. So you really need to know your application. Okay. And I should say that, Harvard, their admissions interview was very much they went through my application like with a fine tooth comb. And they only asked me one question that was like kind of a behavioral question, kind of like the one that I told you about earlier. Like, how do you handle critical feedback? Mostly they just wanted, in the Harvard interview, they wanted me to expand on certain things in my application. Okay. Whereas Kellogg is much different. Kellogg doesn't do that as much. Kellogg asks a lot more behavioral questions where you have to come up with stories yourself rather than just kind of piggyback off of whatever's in your application. Okay. So you have to kind of know that. You can know that by talking to alumni or talking to people like me or current students. But, that's something that you need to make sure that you do. And for healthcare professionals, I think it's also, I wanted to show you this. This is something that I just barely included in my application for residency. This was a paper that I was part of. There's my name. I'm third. It's called Spontaneous Resolution of Peristomal Gallbladder Herniation After Attempted Surgical Intervention. The only thing that I really did for this paper was do a literature review on peristomal gallbladder herniations. And if I'm being totally honest with you, if an interviewer were to ask me about that right now, I'd probably have a hard time telling them exactly what the paper was about because it was so long ago. It was something that I haven't done in a long time, and it's pretty technical, right? So most of the things that you're doing in healthcare are probably pretty technical. Maybe you've worked on it a long time ago. Maybe it's something that the details are a little fuzzy on, right? So if you do if you choose to include it in your application, just know that that's fair game for any question, and that it will reflect poorly on you if you're not able to tell them the details in a really coherent and succinct way. Okay. So for healthcare professionals, I say know your application, but it's probably a little harder to know your application as a healthcare professional because some of the things that you've done are pretty technical and might have been from a long time ago. All right. So third strategy, how to do the question, tell me about yourself different. All right. So let me share with you something that I learned from Kellogg, and something that I actually found was really helpful, something that's really interesting. I think the first inclination that we all have when somebody says, tell me about yourself, is to launch into our background, right? So if you were to ask me, tell me about yourself, I would say, oh, I did a chemical engineering undergrad. I did 2 years at the patent office, and I went to this medical school. It's an engineering-based medical school. And I also did a 1-year MBA at Kellogg. And that would kind of be like the end of it. I would basically just read my CV or read my resume to them. And, that's basically, next time you hear somebody tell, when it's like an introduction or you hear someone talk about themselves, almost always, 90 to 95% of the time, people are going to do that. They're just going to go through their background and what brought them to that certain meeting or whatever it is that they're doing. This is something that's different. All right. This is something that was taught to me at Kellogg that I really liked. It's something that they call the pitch framework. And the first thing to do was to lead with your destination. Where are you going? And then give them a vision of who you want to become. Give them a vision of what your life or career that you hope to have. And then give them your backstory. Your backstory is still important, but it's not necessarily something that you should lead with, because your destination is usually more interesting than your backstory, as long as your destination is well thought out and you've thought through exactly what it is that you want to do. And then you connect the dots for the person. You say, this is where I'm going, this is where I've been, and this is why it's important to you. Okay. So I don't know if you guys noticed this, but I kind of did this on you when we started, right? So what did I start with? I said, this is my destination. This is where I'm going. This is who I want to be. These are my dreams. This is what I'm interested in. Then I said, here's my backstory. I told you kind of what my resume is, what my CV is, and where I've been, to hopefully lend credibility to what I'm saying. And then, because you guys are all interested in, I want somebody that knows about interviews. I want somebody that can tell me about their healthcare background and how that healthcare background informs how they approach interviews for an MBA. I said, who am I? I was on an admissions committee, both at Kellogg and my medical school, the Carle Illinois College of Medicine. So I know what it takes, or at least I've had a lot of experience with applicants that really stood out and maybe some applicants that kind of flopped, right? And so this telling me about yourself, I think that this framework is almost immediately more interesting than just reading to me your resume or reading to me your CV, basically. And something that you should try and do whenever you pitch yourself to other people. And one thing that they talked about at Kellogg was that your pitch, this pitching framework should be used to get a second conversation. This is a framework that can be used to say, I'm hoping that, by you listening to what I'm about to tell you, you're going to be interested in talking to me more in the future. And so obviously here I am as a aspiring coach here on Leland. I want you to be interested in talking to me in the future, right? So I'm interested in you potentially wanting to get some coaching help and want to do that. So for me, this is something that I think is going to help you as you consider, the tell me about yourself question that comes up almost every time. All right. So for healthcare professionals, I thought that it's really important for you to zero in on connect the dots, number 3, because if you're in healthcare, there's a good reason for you to there's a lot of reasons for people in healthcare to just stay in healthcare, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that healthcare roles are only limited to just healthcare roles. There's obviously people that work at pharmaceutical companies or healthcare consulting firms or, VCs that focus on healthcare. But if you're like, in order to give the MBA admissions interviewers a idea of why you're there and what's important to you, the connect the dots section is really, really important. And especially helps you answer the question that will come up every single interview. You have to be able to answer, tell me about yourself. You have to be able to answer, why are you getting an MBA? And you also have to answer, why are you getting this MBA? Why do you care about interviewing with us? Those are all things that you need to answer. And I think that this pitch framework really helps you understand that. Okay. I did another event just recently about why you should consider doing an MD MBA. And these are some of the reasons why I think that you should consider it and why I considered it. And so I think that I'm only sharing this with you because maybe you don't have an MD, or maybe you're in, some other form of a different healthcare role than in medical school or as a physician. But, these are the things that help me consider, how do I sell myself to an MBA admissions committee as someone that needs an MBA? And why do I care about it? Why is it something that will help me, And that's something that, you should consider for sure before each of your interviews. All right. Okay. So 4th strategy, 6:34. I'm doing okay. I'm just going to come back and see if there's any questions. I don't see any people in the chat or anything. If you'd like to ask a question, just go ahead and stop me. But I'm going to keep going to the 4th strategy here. All right. So 4th strategy, do not ramble. Okay. So do not ramble. Do not ramble. Do not ramble. I just have to say it like 1,000 times. Do not ramble. So I told you earlier about how writing is not interviewing, because interviewing, you're able to express yourself more. You're able to talk about yourself a little bit more. You're not limited to certain word limits or character limits. However, interviewing does not equal rambling. Okay. And I think that this is something that you have to really keep in mind. You really need to make sure that you're succinct. You're still succinct. You're still able to express yourself more, but you really got to give maybe 1 to 2 minute responses to each question. And that's a little bit extreme. You know, your responses to each question should be kept within probably 5 minutes at the most, maybe, the shorter that you can make each of your responses, the better. And let me tell you why. Okay. So, oh, dang, the gifts didn't show up as things, but let's just say here on the left, is the paper that the admissions interviewer has. And each of these lines are the questions that they have for you as an interviewer, the things that they want to get to. And let's say you start at this one, and I wish that this wasn't here, but the guy, the GIF in the back, the guy's going blah, 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 blah. It's supposed to be kind of funny, hopefully give you a little bit of a laugh. Like I'm just blowing through this entire first question that you just asked me, right? And then let's say that you don't get to all of these other questions that the admissions interviewer has, right? There's 4 lines here, so to speak, of questions that they want to ask you, but they're definitely not going to spend more time with you than they're going to spend with everyone else. Okay. So that's what I was trying to tell you with the second GIF, was that that's just a disaster. It's a disaster because they don't get to evaluate you on everything that they want to evaluate you on. And it kind of leaves something of a bad taste in their mouth because they didn't get a full experience with you that they really wanted, and that will reflect poorly on you. So I can't say enough. In the admissions interviews that I did at Kellogg, this was probably the biggest red flag that I had for most of the applicants. They all were exceptional people. They all had great backgrounds. They were all interesting. But if I'm trying to if I'm trying to find somebody that can really be effective and influential, I'm probably not going to find that in somebody that might be speaking too long and not giving me a lot of opportunities to ask all the questions that I want to ask. Okay. So don't ramble. That's really important. Please don't ramble. All right. Let me go to the next thing. So for healthcare professionals, what does that mean? Well, I want to start by just saying, use your big words. All right. When you're in healthcare, there's oftentimes projects or disease states or, pharmaceuticals or medical devices that you use and that you work on that are associated with kind of big words, right? You can use those big words, and I want you to use them because they sound impressive. They really are impressive, and you've earned it. Remember my story about, the admissions interview with Harvard, where I was like, oh, there's this cool idea I came up with for complicated cholecystectomies. I can say cholecystectomy, but then I need to be ready to describe those big words briefly. Okay. So I think that this is the advantage that you have as a healthcare professional or as someone who has an experience in healthcare, is that you probably have worked on things that sound impressive and that you should really use. And that's something that I hope that you can take away from this, is that you should use those big words, but be prepared to describe them briefly, because they're not going to always know exactly what that big word is. But you also got to be careful that you don't ramble a lot. Okay. So let me give you some examples. I thought this would just be kind of fun. Here's a medical term. I've used this one a lot. I promise I'm not like obsessed with gallbladders, but cholecystectomy comes up a lot for me. But that's just removing gallbladders, right? How about hypertrophic obstructive cardiomyopathy? Maybe there's a drug that you worked on at a pharmaceutical company for this certain condition. And that sounds really intense and really interesting. And they're not going to know exactly what that is, probably. And you can say, oh, that's just a wall thickening of a heart chamber that obstructs the pumping of blood to the body, right? How about acute post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis? That sounds really interesting, and most people are not going to know what you're talking about when you say that, but you can just say, oh, that's an inflammation of kidney cells after getting a strep infection, right? And then this one is my favorite. This is kind of a joke, but this is my favorite term that I learned in med school for just how insane some of these terms can be. But here's contralateral homonymous superior quadrantinopia. That is a visual. It is, I'm kind of joking. This is a joke. Obviously, this is probably something that you work on. If it is something that you've worked on, then use that big word because that sounds really impressive, right? But it's just basically a visual field defect in both eyes that's only in one quadrant of the eye, but it's in the same quadrant of the eye, right? So use that word if you can. All I'm saying is, as a healthcare professional, you've worked on interesting things. Use those words, but be prepared to explain it, okay? My fifth strategy is to find the school's ethos. Find what it is that makes them tick and find what it is that defines who they are, okay? So I'm going to tell you what Kellogg's is. Kellogg's was high impact, low ego. They're looking for high impact, low ego individuals at Kellogg. And that's something that I probably heard 1,000 times while I was there. This is something that this is definitely it's like a motto. It is an ethos. It's something that they care about. They want to find people that can have an high impact, but that aren't arrogant about it, right? It's interesting though, because I actually, in preparation for this, I thought, I wonder how long it would take for me to find that phrase on just Kellogg's website. Okay. So here we go. Here on the top left is the front landing page for Kellogg's website. And as obviously I don't see high impact, low ego there. I had to scroll down a little bit and find this page. Again, they're talking about being a Kellogg leader and they're talking about all these other things. We're looking for strong, empathetic leaders, but still, I don't see high impact, low ego. That's not there. How about down? But then down for here, I had to click to another page that tells that the page was, about find out what makes us who we are, right? And I go to that page and I had to scroll down some more. And here I find it's a little hard to see, but it says a high impact, high empathy perspective. That's what they're looking for. I don't know if they've changed. Obviously, when I was there, literally this past year, it was high impact, low ego. Maybe they've already changed on me, but that's the first mention of something that I heard probably 1,000 times at Kellogg on their website. And it's baked into everything else that they have on their website too. So what I'm telling you is you're not necessarily going to find the school's ethos by just looking at the website, okay? And that ethos, and why does that matter? I mean, why does it matter to find the school's ethos? Well, it matters because that's how they're going to interview you, because that's what they're looking for. That's what Kellogg was looking for. They're looking for high impact, low ego individuals. And I'm obviously not going to tell you exactly what they ask in their interviews, but I can definitely tell you that a lot of their questions are going to be surrounding that ethos, okay? So for healthcare individuals, what does that mean? Well, it means that in order to find it, what I'm telling you is that you have to reach out to people at the school, either current students or alumni, and just say, what makes this school tick? What do you think that they're going to care about when they interview me? And what are the things that I should be prepared to answer when they interview me, right? And for healthcare professionals, at every single school, there is a healthcare club. And that healthcare club is going to give you an idea of the type of individuals that they're interested in not hiring, but admitting to their school. And I think that this is a really powerful way to do it because here you can find the people at the business school. All of these websites, I'm going to show you all of them. Here's Kellogg's. Here's Stanford's. They all have, their healthcare club website. Here's Harvard's, HBS. They have a healthcare club website. Here's Wharton, and here's Booth. They all have a healthcare club website, and they all have the leadership there. And the leadership there are all business students that have a healthcare background. And they all have connections to admissions committees at their schools, especially those that are in like the higher leadership roles, like the president or co-president or vice presidents or whatever, But to me, I think to really help yourself stand out in an interview, it would be awesome if you went and found say you're going to interview at Booth, and you go and find the co-president of the healthcare club at Booth, and you reach out to that person on LinkedIn, and you happen to see that maybe you went to the same undergrad, or maybe you have similar backgrounds or whatever it is. And you can just say, hey, I'm interested in coming to booth. I'm interviewing there soon. I'd really like to get your perspective on what I should be prepared for in my interview and how it can help me, And I want you to tell me what kind of makes Booth tick. What is it about Booth um, that makes them who they are, right? I would say if you were to ask that question to me of Kellogg, I would say they're looking for high impact, low ego individuals. At Booth, they're going to have something else that they say, whatever it is, but you'll know the kind of thing that they're going to ask you in your interviews. And the thing I think that really helps with this is that you can hopefully be able to name drop that individual in the interview. Name dropping shows hustle. It shows that you're actually trying to think through this a little bit more carefully than just showing up, brushing your teeth and wearing a suit and showing up, And it shows like a certain amount of interest and hustle that will reflect well on you in the interview. Okay. So I would say for each person here, whatever school you're interviewing at, go to these websites, find people in the healthcare club that you think either have the same background as you or are doing similar things as you, and get there, hopefully get some time with them so that you can get an idea of what to expect in your interview. And it also gives the admissions interview a vision of the type of student that you'll be, because you're probably going to be in the healthcare club and you're probably going to be talking and interacting with a lot of these people when you go to that school. All right. Okay. So sixth strategy is mock interviews. This is where you put it all together. Obviously, I think that a critical part of this is you have your story matrix that you story design, and the mock interview is going to give you an opportunity to make sure that you smooth out some of the rough edges of those stories that you have. All right. So for these mock interviews, I wanted to just show you this picture of the hospital that I did my medical training at, my medical school at. I actually took my interview with Kellogg at noon on a Friday, and I had just barely finished rounds, and I had just barely finished rounds with the surgery team, and it was kind of quick. I had to kind of dart out of there. I went to this library that was inside this hospital, and I had to put up a sign that said, "Please don't come in." But of course, I wasn't totally prepared with that, and I felt like somebody could walk in at any moment, and that would probably take out a lot of my momentum in my interview. And I was wearing scrubs on bottom and a shirt and tie and a suit on top. And I just want to tell you this because I felt flustered. I felt like I hadn't totally prepared for the interview quite like I should have. And although it still worked out okay, I definitely felt like had I maybe invested in some more mock interviews in the first place and thought through, okay, I really need to make sure that I have the right location. I need to make sure that I feel comfortable in that location. I need to make sure the lighting looks good in that location. I need to make sure that the stories that I'm ready to tell sound interesting and good. And there's all these different things that I felt like I could have done differently with my interview. And that's what the mock interview will do for you. And so I think that this really applies to healthcare professionals because you likely may be in similar situations. Maybe your interview will be a virtual interview in the middle of the day after you're done rounding, or after you're done working with patients, or after you're done with a meeting on a certain pharmaceutical project that you're working on, whatever it is. But I just think like if you can schedule your interview carefully and think through the busy schedule that you likely have as a healthcare professional, that you'll really set yourself up for more success and a better opportunity to present yourself well to the admissions committee. Okay. So just consider that. All right. And now the seventh strategy is to just be you. Okay. You're probably like, oh, you got to 6 strategies and then you couldn't come up with another one. So you came up with something like this. And I can guarantee you that is not what happened here. Okay. That didn't happen here because it's kind of funny because I'm still applying for residency interviews. I'm applying for residency right now, and I'm in the process of writing personal statements and writing out my experiences and getting ready to interview and doing all those things. It's very similar to what you're doing for an MBA interview. And the pressure was just so high. It was just like a week or two ago that I was talking to my wife, and I'm like, there's so much angst about what I put down on paper about me, because it can either reflect poorly, it can reflect well on me, or it can reflect poorly on me. And how do I say it a certain way to make sure that this person doesn't think that it's a certain thing? And how do I make sure that it comes across just perfectly right? And I'm telling you this because I just feel for those that get anxiety, or they worry about how they present themselves. And oftentimes, because they worry so much about how they present themselves, they're not really presenting them, or they're not really presenting who they are. And so I think that it's really important to remember, especially in healthcare. Let me just go to the next slide so you can see that this actually applies to everyone. The strategy is the same for both non-healthcare professionals and healthcare professionals alike. I think in healthcare, we're constantly jumping through hoops. We're constantly getting tested. We're constantly, dealing with issues that other businesses just don't have to deal with. The FDA regulations surrounding pharmaceuticals, surrounding medical devices, surrounding patient care, surrounding all these different things. It's just a different animal. It's a different animal. I think that the people that are attracted to it are kind of just different animals, and that they kind of have to be a little type A. They kind of have to be like pretty hardcore and intense. They kind of have to always show that they're on and doing well, and they know their stuff, and they're doing everything right. And that can be really overwhelming and stressful. And so I hope that, I've told you a lot of different strategies to, present yourself well and really make sure that, you're doing everything right and you're doing everything exactly how you should. I feel like the seventh one is hopefully a counterbalance to that, and that I hope you can just remember that who you are is who you are, and that's ultimately what's going to be the defining feature of your application. It's just who you are, And so if you're worrying about if there's a story that you feel like would really, tell the story of you the best, but you're worried about how it might come across, obviously judge this for yourself to make sure, but I would really encourage you to lean into more of the things that make you who you are and less of the things about who you think they want you to be, And I think that will benefit you well in this process. And like I said, I think that will actually help you be a better applicant and be a better admissions. You will have a better chance if you make sure that you actually present who you are. So remember that. I hope that that's helpful. All right. So what's next? Obviously, I am an admissions coach here on Leland. I have extensive experience in both interviewing applicants and reviewing applicants, reviewing, applications to both medical school and business school. So I'm specifically offering this interview prep package because it's kind of interview time or interview season. So we'll start with an initial consultation and assessment where we'll probably dig pretty deep into your story matrix and make sure that I help you brainstorm just every last story in your life that you think could be helpful for your interview. We'll do interview skills development, make sure that we learn how to tell your stories in a really succinct and powerful way. And then this will also offer 2 mock interviews. I would like to do 2 mock interviews, and then we will review them together and make sure that I give you the advice and give you the insights that I have to help you really perform your best. And then there'll just be a final refinement and confidence building. It'll kind of be like strategy number 7, where I'll just be like, hey, look at all this hard work we've did. Now just take some breaths, be who you are, and go in and kill it. All right. So I currently am offering this for $500 for 5 hours of coaching time, about $100 an hour. However, because you're here, I don't know. Again, my animations are a little off, but because you're here, I wanted to offer a 10% discount. This discount ends September 30th because I think that, you really need to get moving on this pretty quickly because your interviews will be coming up soon. And this is the code that you can use on my profile to get the get that package if you're interested in it. All right. And then, of course, I offer other things. If you're really, really nice to me and you ask just super nicely and with, a kissy face and a pouty expression, then I'll probably give you a discount on the 10% discount on the other packages if you're interested in them. But I also offer just comprehensive healthcare specific MBA package, which is, from start to finish. And then, of course, the essay editing package. I know essays are kind of in the past, but if you're applying round 2, then that's something that you need to think about as well. All right. So thank you so much for coming. Please leave a review. The reviews really do help me. And I'm looking to just kind of build those up on my profile. And here's a link to my profile if you need it. And that's the end. I will leave. Oh, I can't go back. Dang. Let me see if I can go back here. So you can get the QR code if you want it. Awesome. All right, I have some time. I'm willing to answer any questions that you guys have. If there's anything. Oh yeah, sorry, Tony. I see. Did I disconnect for a second? I hope I didn't disconnect for too long. But if you guys have any questions, I'm happy to stay. If not, then it's nice to meet you and hope to hear from you soon. Okay, nobody's here anymore.